Hello and welcome. My name is Daewoud, the founder of Australian Combat and Exercise. We're an education and sports science business, leading the way in the fitness industry and combat sports. We also conduct research and lots of seminars on health and wellness. Myself personally, I've got a background in martial arts spanning 30 years, teaching freestyle martial arts and boxing and kickboxing. I've been mentored by many great martial artists in Australia and pioneers, and it's with great honour I'm here today chatting with my friend and colleague, Dr. Luke Del Vecchio, to share with you some of our knowledge and some of the stuff that we brought into this company and share it with like-minded individuals, especially martial arts schools. Luke, thanks for your time. Just a bit of background on yourself and why you're here today.
Thanks very much, Case. I'm here today because firstly, like yourself, martial arts trained, having spent a number of years training in various Kung Fu systems, Wu Chi and Wing Chun, to name a few. So a passionate martial artist and a strong background in martial arts training. And throughout my martial arts training, I've also continually undertook education in sport and exercise science, and got to this point in my career where I'm now trying to merge the two. And I guess I see a way forward for the martial arts industry if we can draw upon the knowledge in the sports science realm. So very, very passionate about that and very keen to see more of the sports science concepts and being influenced in the martial arts industry, that's for sure.
Now, people hear the terms exercise science and sports science, but what are they and why are they important for us martial arts instructors to understand at least why they exist?
Well, I think what we need in this day and age of easily accessible information is confidence that the information that we access is reliable and accurate. And sports science, exercise science trained disciplines are built on evidence-based practice. So any statements, information that comes from an exercise science or sports science organisation generally is peer-reviewed, well-referenced and considered to be evidence-based, and it's the hallmark of our profession. And that should give the reader much more confidence that the information they're obtaining isn't someone's opinion, but it's actually based on strong scientific evidence. And therein lies the important point that we've got so much information available, but not all that information is accurate or reliable.
And that takes me to my next question about, in the martial arts world, you're taught to always listen to your master, your instructor. He or she knows best. And you pretty much go in there and you're in their hands. And I guess what could be challenging is where you may have some new coaches out there that are still taking old school approaches in their training sessions. Now, can the old school training and the new school training, as in stuff that's got some science backing, can they coexist? Do all coaches need to just drop the old school and upset all their masters, or they can work with both worlds quite hand in hand?
Absolutely. I think there's hope there. And look, this is a common problem across all sports. So it's certainly not isolated to the martial arts industry. So we certainly don't want to come across as picking on the martial arts instructors, or this is a unique case just in the martial arts industry where the coach has a lot of responsibility. And as coaches are all well-intentioned individuals, they try and take on a lot of responsibility and wear many different hats, which can be a good and bad thing. And I guess the positive side, of course, is that they build rapport and trust with their athletes or students. But on the negative side, I guess that large expectation and the requirement to wear so many hats might leave them a little bit short in some areas. And these areas typically are areas that are well covered in the sport and exercise science community. So where there can be a very good amalgamation between the coach and the exercise and sports scientist is that area, those grey areas, areas that pertain to how do I make sure that my athlete or students are recovering properly from training? How do I make sure that I'm giving them the optimal training program that's going to enhance their performance rather than be a detriment to their performance? How can I support my student or athlete with nutrition advice and other training modalities? So there's so many questions that coaches and martial arts instructors, I'm sure, are asked on a daily basis by students. And they feel that obligation to answer, but sometimes their answer might fall a little bit short or might not really contain the right information, and it leaves the student potentially in a precarious situation where they might go and follow that advice, but that advice can lead to further fatigue or could exacerbate an injury, and that's certainly what no one wants to see happen. So that's why I think it is important that we strive to try and create a network and a collaboration between the martial arts instructors and the sport and exercise science community or sport and exercise science professionals.
I think it's also important that us martial arts instructors and coaches out there stay within our scope of practice. And look, I don't know if there is a formal scope of practice in the martial arts industry. There may or may not be. In fitness and exercise science, you can work along some protocols, but if you step outside them, you're taking risk and you can be held liable if something wrong happens. For example, nutrition is a classic one. I guess myself, I've got a good understanding of nutrition. I run a sports science company. We run nutrition seminars. Not everyone has that. I guess my advice would be to other coaches out there is to build networks and relationships and maybe make referrals that are appropriate, especially for those that are training boxers or kickboxers or competitive athletes in Taekwondo, and they need to eat the right way. I think it's crucial they get expert advice rather than jumping online and just going by hearsay. Would you agree with that, Luke?
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said, mate. Very well said indeed. That critical word is scope of practice, and we're all bound by the limits of the education we've all received in the coaching world. There's a certain amount of education and knowledge and skills you receive through formal training pathways to be a coach, accredited coach, and that's no different for the exercise and sports scientists. So we all have boundaries. We've got to respect those boundaries and be aware that when you step out of them, you are vulnerable legally, that your insurance won't stand up if you provided information such as information on nutrition, particularly for a competitive athlete. So if it's a combat athlete preparing for a competition, there can be some serious repercussions of the wrong advice nutritionally. So you need to know where your boundaries lie, and you need to create a network. And in that network could also include a sports dietitian, for example, who does have the scope of practice to provide exact recommendations to a combat athlete on how much carbohydrate they should eat, how much protein, what we would call the macronutrient breakdown. That they're really the professional of choice in that regard. So certainly knowing your boundaries is important, and being aware of your scope of practice even more so.
And if you look at some coaches in the UFC or athletes, they've got their striking coach, their grappling coach, then they've got their dietitian, then they've got their psychologist. So there's a whole team in all competitive sports. There's a team involved, and I've seen over the years the one instructor wants to take care of all. And for me personally, I don't operate that way when I'm coaching my athletes or my competitive fighters. I think it's too hard. It puts too much pressure on me. My goal is to focus on skills and to motivate and inspire my athlete to perform. And then I seek to individuals like yourself, our strength and conditioning team, etc. So if there's one thing I can urge martial arts coaches out there is to build some networks and make some relationships with experts, which can really strengthen your school, and learn as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely well said. And the other benefit of that, Hayes, is you raise your professional profile and you learn from these other coaches and allied health professionals. You actually learn from them by being around and involved with that referral process. You're learning and developing professionally as well. So, as the saying goes, a rising tide does raise all boats. So rather than trying to be an island and just isolate yourself and your athletes and your students, creating that network of experts around you, or support staff or support consultants, can really help you as well as an instructor and coach to grow professionally. So you certainly don't, the benefit of collective wisdom, as they say, is certainly the take home there.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk about now preparing for competition or gradings, and the risks, which I've seen many times in the industry, is the risks of overtraining and lack of recovery. Now, a grading, depending on all martial arts, are quite a grueling event. They can range from 1 to 3 to 4 hours. And a competitive bout in Taekwondo, kickboxing, judo, jiu-jitsu, they're also long days if you're doing round robin. how do people look? This is a short interview, but look, preparing for competition isn't just about training every day and getting the hours out on the mat or in the dojo, is it?
No, well, that might apply to a certain point, but then there's got to be a line in the sand where, as you approach the event, and grading should be viewed as any other competitive event, that there needs to be a planned training program that incorporates a build-up phase and then a taper. And, athletes have been doing this for a long time, and they do so very successfully for a very good reason, because it works. The whole concept is how, peaking your student for that event. So we consider a grading to be a competition or a competitive-like event, then you must pay attention to the training volume that the students are taking part in or undertaking prior to that event, because the real risk is that they could end up getting injured, seriously injured during the grading itself, because they're over fatigued and under prepared. And both of those two important issues require a knowledge of recovery methods, but a knowledge also of programming intensity and volume. So every training session will have a set amount of drills, be it sparring, be it preparatory drills, pad work. These are all examples of activities that are conditioning that person. Mm-hmm. And have to have a certain amount of work in those areas before grading. But if you do too much work, then you risk overtraining that individual, and overtraining opens the box to a whole host of serious complications.
We've seen it
serious injury.
We've seen it firsthand, haven't we, Luke? Athletes in competition who are fit and crash during a fight in dramatic fashion, almost in one round. It's amazing to see, and sad, because there's a talented athletes and they crash during the contest.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. You're only as good as your last performance, as they say. And unfortunately, in these situations where you've got a very talented and skillful individual, they're being hamstrung by fatigue. They've gone into that event under recovered and thus over fatigued, and they certainly their ability to perform is limited, and it's very sad, because that person put so much work into that event. To lose that competition simply because they were tired is very, very disappointing, and it'd be a hard pill to swallow for that individual. So it does have serious consequence, no doubt.
And tapering, is there a number of days or weeks that should be applied? Is it dependent on what style of martial art, what type of sport they're doing, or is there just one tip you can give the instructors and coaches out there?
Well, look, we can draw upon examples from other sports, and a taper can range anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on, I guess, the intensity or the vigorous nature of that event. So I think, if a 2-week taper would generally work very well, if, as a general recommendation, I should say, would work very well. And a taper, I must add, isn't no training at all. It's a reduction in training, systematic reduction in training. But there's still individuals still coming to the dojo or to the training center and actually performing some training, but it's just a reduction usually in the training intensity more so than the training volume. So generally speaking, 2 weeks of reduced intensity training is one way that instructors can optimize performance in their students and certainly mitigate the consequences of too much fatigue.
So with sparring, 3 weeks out, you're doing 5 rounds, 5 2-minute rounds with 30 seconds rest, and it's heavy sparring. When the tapering starts, you basically increase the rest maybe, or how would you guide?
There's a few ways you could do it. That's a great question. There's a few ways. Given we don't really need to necessarily sacrifice the volume, it's more the intensity. You could opt in that example of 5 rounds, 5 2-minute rounds, to go to 5 by 1 or even 5 by 45. So that way the intensity is still held, but they're actually reducing the total time, which will therefore reduce the intensity by half. So a 50% reduction would enable that individual to hold their fitness and be able to recover, but and not risk taking too much fatigue into the event. But if you continue to train at the same volume and the same intensity leading up to a grading or a competition, well then how does the athlete ever, or combat athlete I should say, how do they ever get a chance to recover? And you can't express fitness while you're recovering from fatigue. So
Do you have any tips as far as work to rest ratios for competitive martial artists? So how long's a Taekwondo round in a contest? A kickboxing round, it might be a 2-minute round with a minute rest. When they're training for that event, do you have any tips or advice that they can take?
Yeah, this is another aspect of this grading and competitive preparation that it's important information that it might be lacking in the martial arts community. They just don't get access to this, or it's not given in a martial arts specific context. And the question you asked is a really important one, because as you're leading into an event, you've got a taper to consider, but you've also got this specific conditioning phase to consider. So you start very general, you're doing all your general training. And then as you get closer and closer to the event, that training has to become more and more specific to the demands that are going to take place. For example, in a Taekwondo competition, as you alluded to, they will fight for 2 to 3 2.5-minute rounds, depending on the format. But typically what we see, and we know this because we're actually undertaking a time and motion analysis or a research study at the moment, looking at the exact amount of time that the Taekwondo athletes spend attacking versus defending. And what we've observed is, and the study hasn't been completed, but just some preliminary findings suggest that they're actually attacking for 1 to 2 seconds at a time, and then their recovery can be 3 to 4 times that amount. So if they're attacking for 1 to 2 seconds, then they're actually in a defensive or evasive situation for another 4 to 5 seconds before they attack again. So think about the example where the instructor's holding a pad for the athlete and having them doing some drills, trying to replicate the round. So they might be doing a 2.5-minute round on the pads, for example, which is a very common example. But they're attacking to defensive or evasive ratio is completely out.
It's probably the opposite. It's usually the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, it's completely out of whack. So what they're potentially doing is overtraining that particular person for the event, or not training them specifically. So they've got to be able to switch gears. You've got to think about, how does the body adapt? So if you're not switching gears and going from an attacking motion for 1 to 2 seconds back to a defensive motion for, say, 3 to 4 seconds, then on the day, your body's not programmed correctly to respond that way. And there might be a lag time, or the response time might be affected. So it's not specific conditioning per se.
And for those watching, please don't use those figures. If you run a kickboxing school, don't go work on that work to rest ratio. It's different, probably different.
Well, the work to rest ratio has been in kickboxing, and it tends to be closer to 5 on, 5 off, and that's known as combat interval. So research by
totally different.
Fabrizio Del Vecchio is a Brazilian researcher who we're collaborating with, and he's one of the world experts in this area of combat interval training, and his research suggests that kickboxing is closer to a 5-second attacking period and a 5-second defensive or evasive period.
How about boxing? Do we have one for that yet?
Depends on amateur and professional, appears to be quite different. Some research suggests it might be closer to 3 on, 2 off, but it doesn't vary a bit. So that question, we would need to look a little more closely at some of the research, what areas of boxing, whether it's amateur or professional.
And who's the poor bugger watching these videos and counting these times? That's what I can't get over.
Yes, it is a very arduous task, and I'm one of those people, and I can tell you now that it's certainly, it's definitely not only a time-consuming task, but a very laborious task, because you've got a stopwatch and you're running the video in slow motion, and every time they throw an attack, you've got to stop it, time how long it goes for, categorize the attack, and so it is definitely a big job.
And we've given everyone a tip on tapering before an event or grading. How about a recovery tip that you can share with everyone? How to ensure they're recovering the right way?
Well, there's various ways to recover from a training session. Probably the most important tip is you do some form of active and passive recovery after your training on a regular basis. So active recovery can be something a very light cool down on a stationary bike, or even the next morning, or the next day. That you'll see. Great example of active recovery is rugby league teams. They go into the pool, they have this recovery session the day after a game, and usually it's done in the pool, and you'll see them just walking up and down. That's active recovery. You know, everyday individual martial arts practitioner or student can do something similar. If they can't get to a pool, then certainly just jumping on the bike, for example, and just doing a 15 to 20 minutes slow ride pedal is a great way to get that flushing effect. So that's active. And then passive. Passive, there's lots of ways you can get passive recovery. Extending your sleep is a really, really effective one and probably an underrated one. So making sure the night after a training session that you're not cutting your sleep short. If anything, you want to sleep in, if possible. If you've got to get to bed a bit earlier, you would have an extended sleep because you need that recovery right after that vigorous training session. So Thursday night's your hardest training session in the dojo or in the gym, then ideally you would make sure that on Friday, perhaps if you could, sleep a bit later, you would do so. And that's a concept known as sleep extension. Very, very effective for recovery.
And it's a tough one considering 94% of Australians struggle getting a good night's sleep. So you really got to program that stuff in, don't you? You got to plan and make sure
you do.
you're not up on your smartphone at 11 o'clock, especially if you're training and you're an athlete. And it's what coaches need to realize. These are the questions I ask my athletes. What time do you go to bed? What are you doing in the evening? Are you eating enough? How's your sleep? Because you can see their performance, if they haven't slept, really drop off. And it really shows sometimes in sparring where they could be killing it one day, then they come in and they're getting towed up and making all these errors. And one simple thing is, I didn't sleep well last night. So the sleep is a huge thing, isn't it, Luke?
It is. It absolutely is. And probably the easiest advice you'd ever hear is just get a good night's sleep. Easy to say, very hard to do. Certainly a complex task, but an important one if you want to recover and be at your best for every training session.
Maybe that's our next video on sleep. We can go 2 hours on that, I think. So there's a lot on that.
No, it is a big topic.
And look, I guess we'll wrap it up there. There's a lot we can talk about. We'll do more of these videos for the martial arts industry. I think it's important they're aware. But anything you want to add as far as some of that stuff we spoke about, Luke?
No, just probably that Tabor thing. It may be confusing for people to really grasp the concept of how do I make sure that I keep my students or combat athletes coming into the gym and training prior to the grading or the competition, but I don't risk overtraining them. And then, as I said, and I want to recap, that it's that progressive reduction in training intensity. So it is really going to get the best result. So just think about how you train your clients your students, and think about how you could just gradually, as they lead into that grading or competition, how can you gradually reduce the intensity that they're training at. So they still feel like they're coming in and doing something, which is important psychologically, but they're not risking overtraining. It's just as simple as reducing that training intensity by about 50% or half.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. So I don't know if I said it earlier, but Luke or Dr. Luke Del Vecchio is one of Australia's most credentialed sports scientists. He's a leading combat researcher and very passionate individual. Through our business, Australian Combat and Exercise, you can access us online on Facebook at Australian Combat and Exercise. Look that up. Or our website, acexercise.com.au. That's acexercise.com.au. We are available for seminars on sport-specific conditioning, nutrition, whatever you need to know, training methods. Doesn't matter what martial art it is. Doesn't matter what sport it is. We're available to present these seminars to coaches, even students. Thanks, Luke. That was very valuable. We'll do some more. And if you have any questions, please contact us via our website. And please remember to follow us on Facebook. Thank you. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Hayes. Yep. Thank you.